Clint Eastwood left the vault open to test her loyalty, pushing the boundaries of trust and uncovering long-hidden secrets. What she did in response not only astonished everyone, but also forever altered the fate of those entangled in that web of intrigue. The moonlight filtered through the study windows as Rosa stared at the antique jewelry box she'd just discovered, hidden behind Clint Eastwood's collection of Western Film Awards. Her hands trembled. For 2 weeks, the entire household had been in turmoil over the missing family heirlooms, Clint's late wife's most treasured possessions, supposedly stolen from the unlocked safe. Yet here they were, deliberately hidden away. A test, just as Miguel had warned her. Behind her, the study door creaked open. Rosa quickly slid the jewelry box back into its hiding place, her heart hammering against her ribs. Working late again. Rosa. Clint's voice carried the familiar gravelly timbre that had captivated movie audiences for decades. She turned, composing her features into practiced calm. Just finishing up, Mr. Eastwood. The library needed dusting. Clint's weathered face revealed nothing as he studied her. At 86, he still commanded every room with the same quiet intensity that had defined his legendary film career. He moved further into the study, his eyes never leaving hers. Funny thing about dust, he said, running a finger along the pristine bookshelf. It reveals our secrets, shows where we've been, what we've touched. Rosa felt a chill despite the warm Carmel evening. 15 years of loyal service, of arriving before dawn and leaving after everyone was settled, of knowing his preferences better than his own children did, all of it suddenly felt precarious, balanced on the edge of a knife. I should prepare your evening tea, she said, moving toward the door. Not yet. Clint blocked her path, his tall frame still imposing despite his age. I think it's time we had a conversation about loyalty, Rosa, about what people do when they believe no one is watching. Rosa's throat tightened. Her immigration, papers, the ones she'd falsified all those years ago when desperation outweighed honesty, seemed to burn in her memory. One call from a man of Clint Eastwood's influence, and everything she'd built would crumble. I don't understand, Mr. Eastwood, she whispered, though the sinking feeling in her stomach told her she understood perfectly. Clint's eyes, still sharp, as they had been on countless movie screens, held hers. I think you do. 6 months earlier. Rosa Garcia smoothed her apron and glanced at her watch. 5:15 a.m. She slipped through the service entrance of the sprawling Carmel-by-the-Sea estate, the key Clint Eastwood had entrusted to her 15 years ago, turning smoothly in the lock. The kitchen awaited her, immaculate as she'd left it the night before, moonlight still washing through the windows overlooking the Pacific. This morning ritual never changed. Coffee brewing by 5:30, fresh squeezed orange juice from the trees. In the garden, the Los Angeles Times and Wall Street Journal arranged precisely at the head of the dining table. Mr. Eastwood rose at 6:30, never a minute later, a discipline from decades of film sets that retirement hadn't softened. As she measured coffee grounds, Rosa whispered her morning prayers, a lifetime of faith guiding her hands through familiar motions. These quiet moments before the household stirred were sacred, time to gather her thoughts and prepare for whatever challenges the day might bring. At 62, Rosa carried herself with the dignity of someone who had overcome much. Her dark, hair now streaked with silver, was always impeccably pinned back. Her movements were efficient, nothing wasted. The journey from Oaxaca to California 20 years ago had taught her the value of precision, of being irreproachable. When you existed in the margins of American society, excellence wasn't an aspiration, but a requirement. The aroma of coffee filled the kitchen just as Miguel, the gardener, appeared at the back door with fresh flowers for the dining room. At 58, Miguel had worked for the Eastwood estate almost as long as Rosa. His weathered face brightened when he saw her. "Buenos dias," he said softly, careful not to disturb the quiet. "Gardenias today. I remembered they were Mrs. Eastwood's favorite." Rosa smiled, accepting the fragrant blooms. "Thank you, Miguel. He'll notice." 10 years since Mrs. Eastwood's passing, and still Clint appreciated these small gestures of remembrance. Miguel lingered, watching Rosa arrange the flowers with practiced care. "There's talk in town," he said finally, "about Mr. Eastwood's daughter returning." Rosa's hands stilled momentarily. "Catherine? After all this time?" Miguel nodded. "Carlos," at the market, heard from the wine merchant who delivers to her San Francisco apartment. "She's selling it, coming back to Carmel." The information settled between them, heavy with implications. Catherine Eastwood's relationship with her father had disintegrated 5 years ago, their last public argument becoming unfortunate gossip throughout the small coastal community. Since then, the only Eastwood child to visit had been his son, and those visits were increasingly rare and tense. "Mr. Eastwood hasn't mentioned anything," Rosa said carefully. Miguel's expression softened with concern. "Just thought you should know, before she arrives and start changing things." The unspoken fear hung between them. New family dynamics meant vulnerability for long-term staff, especially those without proper documentation. Rosa had confided in Miguel years ago about her falsified papers, a confession shared during the Dia de los Muertos celebration, when grief for her faraway family had overwhelmed her usual caution. "We'll be fine," Rosa assured him, though uncertainty fluttered in her chest. "Mr. Eastwood values loyalty." Miguel looked unconvinced but nodded. "I'll be in the West Garden if you need me." After he left, Rosa moved through the house, opening curtains, the Pacific Ocean revealing itself in the gentle dawn light. Each room reflected Clint's preference for understated elegance, no Hollywood ostentation, just quality pieces collected over a lifetime of success. She knew the story behind most of them, little histories Clint had shared during quiet evenings, when loneliness made him talkative. At precisely 6:30, Clint appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed in his usual khakis and a simple button-down shirt. "Morning, Rosa," he said, accepting the coffee she handed him. His director's eye missed nothing, pausing on the gardenias. "Nice touch. Miguel thought you might appreciate them." Clint nodded, carrying his coffee to the dining table. As he unfolded the newspaper, Rosa noticed again how silence seemed to gather around him these days. After decades commanding movie sets and captivating audiences, he had retreated into a quieter existence, especially since his wife's passing. The house, designed to accommodate a family and entertain Hollywood contemporaries, now emphasized his solitude. 3 days later, Catherine Eastwood arrived unannounced, her sleek Tesla crunching up the gravel driveway as Rosa prepared lunch. The resemblance to her father was striking, the same intensity, the same evaluating gaze as she entered the house she'd grown up in. "Rosa," she acknowledged coolly. "You're still here." "Welcome home, Miss Catherine," Rosa replied, maintaining the professional warmth that had defined their relationship for 15 years. "Your father is in the garden studio. Shall I tell him you've arrived?" "No need," Catherine set down her designer handbag, glancing around the foyer with a detachment that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nothing changes here, does it? Like a museum to the past." Rosa recognized the edge in her voice, the complicated feelings of adult children returning home, confronting the spaces that shaped them. "Your room is ready whenever you'd like to see it." Catherine's surprised expression confirmed Rosa's instincts had been correct. Despite no advance notice, she'd freshened the bedding in Catherine's old room weekly, anticipating that someday reconciliation might come. "That won't be necessary," Catherine said, her professional facade returning. "I'll be staying at the Highlands Inn. This is strictly business, sorting out some estate matters." Later that evening, after a tense dinner where Clint and his daughter engaged in careful small talk that avoided all meaningful subjects, Rosa overheard their voices rising from the study. "You've become paranoid, Dad," Catherine was saying, her controlled tone finally breaking. "Testing people? Setting traps for your own staff? This isn't healthy. You don't understand the movie business, the people who... This isn't about your career. It's about Mom. Ever since she died, you've been looking for betrayal everywhere." Rosa moved quietly past the door, uncomfortable with hearing this private moment, yet concerned about the mention of testing staff. She'd sensed something shifting in the household atmosphere recently. Items rearranged, documents left conspicuously visible, small amounts of cash placed in obvious locations. then quietly returned to Clint's desk drawer when no one took the bait. The next morning, Clint seemed unusually withdrawn during breakfast. As Rosa refilled his coffee, he looked up with an expression she hadn't seen before, a vulnerability beneath his usual composure. "Do you think people can change, Rosa? Or are we just who we are, no matter how much time passes?" She considered her answer carefully. "I believe people reveal who they truly are over time, Mr. Eastwood. Change is possible, but character, that stays consistent." He studied her, something unreadable in his gaze. 15 years you've been here, longer than most marriages last." "It's been my privilege," she answered truthfully. His weathered hand reached out, tapping the table absently. "Catherine thinks I should modernize, get younger staff, someone who understands computers and social media." His eyes found hers again. "What do you think about that?" Rosa felt her chest tighten but kept her expression neutral. "I think it's your home, Mr. Eastwood. You should surround yourself with whatever makes you comfortable." He nodded slowly, seeming to reach some private conclusion. "I'm going to open the safe today, take out Jean's jewelry for Catherine to see. Family pieces she should know about." Rosa acknowledged this with a nod, unsure why he was sharing this mundane detail but filing it away as potentially important. That afternoon, the jewelry box vanished from the unlocked safe. The household erupted into carefully controlled chaos as Clint called his small staff, Rosa, Miguel, the part-time driver Thomas, and the twice-weekly housekeeper Lucia, into the main living room. "I'm not calling the police," he announced, his face impassive. "This is a family matter, and we'll handle it as such. The box will be returned within the week, no questions asked. Otherwise, changes will need to be made." His eyes swept across their faces, lingering a moment too long. On each of them. Rosa felt a chill despite the warm spring day. This wasn't just about missing jewelry. This was the test Catherine had mentioned. Later, in the garden where they couldn't be overheard, Miguel confirmed her suspicions. "He did this at his previous house," Miguel whispered, his hands continuing to prune roses as they spoke. "Carlos told me. His cousin worked there. Valuable items would disappear, staff would be questioned. Eventually, someone would be let go, guilty or not." Rosa felt sick. Why would he do this? Miguel's expression darkened. "Carlos said it started after he discovered Mrs. Eastwood had been having an affair. Now he trusts no one." The revelation stunned Rosa. In all her years with the family, she'd never seen anything but devotion between Clint and his late wife. "That can't be true," she insisted. Miguel shrugged. "People have secrets, Rosa, even good people." That night, unable to sleep, Rosa remembered the jewelry box she'd helped inventory just last year, delicate Art Deco pieces, family heirlooms, and the simple pearl pendant Mrs. Eastwood had worn every day. More than their monetary value, they represented a connection to the past, to family heritage. The thought that Clint would use them in some loyalty test seemed unthinkable. Yet as days passed, Rosa noticed Clint watching them all with new intensity. Small tests appeared. A $100 bill left visible beneath the sofa cushion, an expensive watch forgotten on the bathroom counter, the liquor cabinet left conspicuously unlocked. Each morning, Rosa would discreetly return misplaced valuables to Clint's desk without comment, refusing to acknowledge the game being played. 2 weeks into this unsettling new reality, Catherine confronted her father during dinner with Rosa, still in the room serving the main course. "This is beneath you," Catherine said, her voice low but intense. "Rosa has served this family loyally for 15 years, Miguel for nearly as long, and you're treating them like criminals." Clint's expression hardened. "You've been gone 5 years, Catherine. Don't presume to understand how I run my household." "Mum." "Would be ashamed," Catherine replied, the words landing like physical blows. "Your mother kept a separate apartment in San Francisco for 7 years without my knowledge," Clint responded, his voice dangerously quiet. "So forgive me if I take lessons in honesty elsewhere." The silence that followed was absolute. Rosa froze, the serving dish still in her hands, unwilling to move and draw attention to her presence during this raw family moment. Catherine's face had gone white. "What are you talking about?" Ask Rosa, Clint said, his eyes finding hers across the room. She knew. Didn't you, Rosa? Rosa stood in Clint's study 2 weeks later, the discovered jewelry box now between them on his desk. The revelation hung in the air that she had found what no one was meant to find, that she had seen through his test. How long have you known? She asked quietly, her dignity intact despite the trap she'd fallen into. Clint studied her. Those famous eyes that had stared down countless adversaries on screen now focused entirely on her. About the jewelry, since you found it 3 days ago, the garden studio has security cameras. He paused. About your documentation issues, since your 2nd year here. Rosa felt the blood drain from her face. My documentation? The ghost of a smile touched his lips. I've been in the film industry for 60 years, Rosa. I know the difference between acting and authenticity. You were too good, too careful, so I had you checked out. Her legs threatened to give way. 15 years of fear suddenly realized. Are you going to report me? Clint leaned back in his chair, looking suddenly tired. If that was my intention, it would have happened 14 years ago. Confusion replaced fear. I don't understand. The jewelry test wasn't about theft, Clint said, opening the ornate box to reveal the glittering contents safely inside. It was about loyalty, about who would stay when they thought I had nothing left to offer except suspicion and tests. He met her eyes directly. Everyone fails eventually, except you. You've been testing me for 15 years, Rosa realized, indignation rising through her shock. I've been observing you, he corrected. There's a difference. From down the hallway came the sound of the front door opening, voices, Catherine, and Miguel returning from town. Their time was short. Why are you telling me this now? Rosa asked. Clint closed the jewelry box carefully. Because I'm selling the house, moving somewhere smaller. Catherine's right. It's time for changes. He pushed a thick envelope across the desk. Inside are legal documents prepared by my attorney, citizenship assistance, a reference letter, and compensation for your years of service. Rosa stared at the envelope without touching it. Is this termination? It's freedom, Clint replied, an unfamiliar gentleness in his voice. For both of us. Footsteps approached the study. Rosa's mind raced through implications. The end of this chapter, the beginning of uncertainty. All her careful planning, her managed expectations, suddenly scattered like leaves in a Carmel wind. I don't want your money, she said finally, her voice finding its strength. But I would like to know one thing. Mrs. Eastwood's apartment in San Francisco. Did you make that up to hurt Catherine? Clint's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through his composed exterior. Jean needed space sometimes. From the fame, from me, it wasn't what Catherine thinks. He looked away. We had an understanding. Rosa nodded slowly, years of observed intimacies between the couple finally making sense. Not betrayal, accommodation. The kind of compromise that long marriages sometimes require. Then tell Catherine the truth, Rosa said gently. Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. The study door opened as Catherine appeared, her expression changing from determination to confusion as she took in the scene, her father and Rosa, in what was clearly a significant conversation, the jewelry box open on the desk between them. What's going on? She demanded. Clint looked at his daughter, then back to Rosa, a decision visibly forming in his weathered features. The truth, he said finally. It's time for the truth. 6 months later, under the blooming spring trees in Feinsabinder, the garden of Clint's new, more modest Carmel home, a different gathering took place. No longer employer and staff, but something closer to family, they celebrated Rosa's newly granted citizenship. Miguel stood beside her, his hand occasionally finding hers when emotion threatened to overwhelm. Catherine had flown in from her new position in New York. The months of reconciliation with her father having healed wounds Rosa had once thought permanent. Even Clint's son had returned, the family slowly rebuilding bridges long thought burned. As evening approached, Clint raised a glass in the golden California light, his famous squint softened by genuine emotion. "To freedom," he said, looking directly at Rosa, "and to the family we choose." Rosa felt Miguel's hand tighten around hers. The weight of secrets, his, hers, the Eastwoods, had finally lifted. In its place was something she'd sought since crossing the border 20 years earlier. Not just legal belonging, but genuine acceptance. "To truth," she added, raising her own glass, "and to the courage it takes to finally speak it." Character count, 14 von 985.